Look at something across the room right now. It could be a clock on the wall, a word on a package, or the face of someone close to you. Take a second and really notice it. Is it perfectly sharp, or do you see a slight softness around the edges? Something that wasn't there a few years ago? Most people respond to that change in the same way. They go for an eye exam. They're given a stronger prescription. They get new glasses. And for a short time, things seem better. But then months pass, and something feels off again. The clarity slips. Another visit, another adjustment, stronger lenses, and slowly, almost quietly, the pattern repeats. Stronger glasses, but not truly better vision. Here's something I want you to consider. Those glasses are not actually improving your vision. They're helping you adapt to a deeper change. And that deeper change often has very little to do with your eyes alone. In many cases, it reflects what is happening inside your body, especially in your bloodstream, right now, as you listen to this. You've probably heard that blood sugar can affect vision. Usually, that conversation only comes up when someone is diagnosed with diabetes. But here's what is rarely explained. You don't need a diagnosis for these changes to begin. You don't need extreme numbers on a lab report. What matters more is something subtle and very common: fluctuations. Moments during the day when blood sugar rises higher than it should, and stays there just a little too long, then drops again, and repeats. This pattern, which many people over 50 experience without realizing it, can gradually influence some of the most sensitive structures in your body: your eyes. Inside your eye is a thin, delicate layer called the retina. It is one of the most active tissues in the body. It requires a constant, stable supply of energy, and when that balance is disturbed, even slightly, it tends to be one of the first places where changes begin to show. Now, before we go further, I want to pause for a moment and say something important. If you've noticed any sudden or dramatic changes in your vision, something that appeared quickly, this is not the kind of situation to wait on. In that case, I strongly recommend getting professional medical attention as soon as possible. What we're talking about here is different. This is about gradual changes. Things like vision that slowly becomes less clear over months or years, difficulty reading fine print that used to be easy, glare or halos around lights in the evening, or a general sense that your glasses aren't giving you the same clarity they once did. If that sounds familiar, stay with me. Because there are a few important mechanisms behind this, and once you understand them, things begin to make a lot more sense. Let's start with something that affects a large number of people, but is almost never explained clearly. Inside your eye is a structure called the lens. It sits just behind the pupil and helps focus light. What's interesting is that this lens doesn't have its own blood supply. Instead, it interacts directly with the fluid around it. And that fluid reflects what's happening in your bloodstream. When blood sugar rises quickly after a meal, the level of glucose in that surrounding fluid rises as well. And the lens absorbs some of it. When there's more glucose than needed, part of it gets converted into another substance inside the lens. That substance tends to stay there, and because of how it behaves, it draws water into the lens. Very slowly, the lens begins to hold more fluid than usual, and when that happens, its shape shifts slightly. Even a small change in shape can affect how light is focused. That's when things begin to look a bit softer, a bit less defined. What's important to understand is this. This type of change is not fixed. It can vary. That's why some days your vision feels clearer than others. Why things may look sharper in the morning, and more blurred later in the day. Why a prescription that felt right before suddenly doesn't feel quite right anymore. It's not random. It often follows patterns linked to how your body is processing energy throughout the day. And once you start noticing those patterns, it becomes much easier to understand what your eyes are trying to tell you. Now let's move a little deeper, because the next process is slower, quieter, and over time, more impactful. Inside your eyes are incredibly fine blood vessels. These are some of the smallest vessels in your entire body. They are responsible for delivering oxygen and nutrients to the retina, the part of your eye that translates light into the images you see. These vessels are delicate. They're designed to be flexible, to adjust, to respond to subtle changes. But over time, certain metabolic conditions can begin to affect them. One of those processes is something called glycation. You don't need to remember the term. What matters is the idea behind it. When glucose levels remain elevated too often, Even slightly, glucose can begin to interact with proteins in your body. It attaches to them and slowly changes their structure. In flexible tissues, like the walls of small blood vessels, this matters, because those vessels rely on flexibility. Over time, they can become less elastic, a bit thicker, a bit more rigid. And when that happens, their ability to deliver nutrients efficiently starts to decline. Sometimes they may even become slightly leaky. Not something you feel immediately, but something that can gradually influence how well the retina functions. And here's something important to understand. This process doesn't suddenly appear one day. It develops quietly over years, often long before anyone would ever mention it during a routine check. Which is why many people are surprised when vision changes seem to appear without a clear explanation. Now let's talk about another part of the eye that plays a very specific role. This area is responsible for your sharpest, most detailed vision: reading, recognizing faces, seeing fine details. This small region relies on natural protective compounds that your body gets from food. Two of the most important ones come from colorful plant-based foods, especially dark leafy greens. They act like internal filters, helping reduce the impact of certain types of light and supporting the health of delicate visual cells. Over time, especially with age, levels of these protective compounds can become lower. And when the body is also dealing with ongoing metabolic stress, they may be used up faster than they are replaced. Which means the eye has less natural protection than it used to. Again, this is not something that happens overnight. It's gradual, and in many cases, it's connected not just to what you eat, but how your body is processing that food. There's also another connection that many people don't immediately think about, and that's the relationship between the eyes and other systems in the body. For example, the same type of small vessels that support the eyes are also found in other organs. When those systems are under strain over time, it can influence overall balance in the body, including things like fluid regulation and internal pressure. And while you may not notice that directly, your eyes are sensitive enough to reflect those shifts. That's why it's helpful to think of vision not just as something happening in the eyes alone, but as part of a larger picture. The lens of your eye, the transparent structure located just behind the pupil that focuses light on the retina, is composed mostly of water and protein. Unlike most tissues in your body, it does not have its own blood vessels. It doesn't receive nutrients directly from circulation the way your organs do. Instead, it takes in glucose from the fluid that surrounds it. When blood sugar rises quickly after eating, the level of glucose in that surrounding fluid increases as well. As a result, more glucose enters the lens. Inside the lens, excess glucose is converted by an enzyme into another compound. And here is where the issue begins. That compound cannot leave the lens. It has no pathway to exit. So it starts to build up inside. Because of its chemical properties, it draws water toward itself. In the same way a dry sponge pulls in moisture, this compound causes the lens to absorb water. The lens begins to swell. When the lens swells, it can no longer focus light properly. The focal point shifts. Objects that were once sharp start to look softer. Text that was easy to read becomes harder to see clearly. This is not a permanent structural change in the eye. It is a temporary shift in fluid balance. And it helps explain something many people notice but don't understand. Why vision feels worse on certain days. Why it may be clearer in the morning before eating and less sharp later in the day. Why a prescription that worked months ago suddenly feels incorrect. The second mechanism works differently. It develops more slowly, stays unnoticed longer, and over time has a deeper impact. The retina is supplied by the smallest blood vessels in the human body. These capillaries are so narrow that red blood cells pass through them one at a time. They are essential to your vision. Without them, the photoreceptors, the cells responsible for converting light into signals your brain can interpret, receive no oxygen, no nutrients, and no ability to repair themselves. Over time, consistently elevated blood sugar begins to affect these vessels through a process known as glycation. Glycation occurs when glucose molecules attach themselves to proteins and fats in the body. They bind to them and gradually alter their structure. As a result, those proteins become less flexible and less functional. Now think about the structure of capillaries. Their walls are made of flexible proteins. They are designed to expand and contract, to regulate flow, and to maintain stability under pressure. When glycation affects these proteins, the structure of the vessel walls begins to change. They become thicker. You can imagine it like a soft, flexible tube that slowly hardens over time. As this process continues, the vessels lose their ability to function properly. They may begin to weaken. Small leaks can develop. When this happens in the vessels that supply the retina, fluid and small amounts of blood can seep into the surrounding tissue. The retina begins to swell, and when the retina swells, the signals it sends become less accurate. Vision starts to lose clarity. This is the early stage of what is clinically referred to as diabetic retinopathy. But the key point here is often overlooked. The process that leads to it, glycation, begins long before any formal diagnosis, sometimes years earlier. You do not need to be diagnosed with diabetes for this process to occur. What matters is cumulative exposure, how often blood sugar rises, how high it rises, and how long it stays elevated. That pattern over time determines the level of impact, not just a single number on a lab report. The third mechanism affects a different area of the eye, and this one is most closely connected to nutrition. At the center of the retina is a small region called the macula. This area is responsible for your sharpest and most detailed vision. It allows you to read, recognize faces, and see fine details clearly. The macula contains the highest concentration of cone photoreceptors in the eye. These are the cells responsible for high-resolution vision. It is also the part of the eye most affected in age-related visual decline. Now, the macula relies on two specific pigments for protection. These pigments come from your diet. They are responsible for filtering certain types of light before it reaches the most sensitive cells underneath. You can think of them as a natural internal shield. They absorb potentially harmful light and reduce stress on the retina. At the same time, they help neutralize reactive molecules that can damage cells. Here is where the problem develops. When blood sugar is not well regulated, the retina is exposed to increased oxidative stress. This means more reactive molecules are produced, and those molecules need to be neutralized. The pigments in the macula are used in that process. Over time, they are consumed faster than the body can replace them, so their levels begin to drop. Now combine that with another factor. Most people over the age of 60 already have lower intake of foods that contain these pigments, especially dark leafy vegetables. So you have two things happening at the same time: lower intake and faster depletion. As a result, the protective layer in the macula becomes weaker. More light reaches the photoreceptors without being filtered, and over time, stress begins to accumulate in that tissue. Visual clarity gradually declines. The fourth mechanism connects your vision to something many people don't immediately associate with the eyes: your kidneys. At first, these may seem unrelated, but they share an important biological similarity. Both the eyes and the kidneys rely heavily on very small blood vessels. And these vessels are particularly sensitive to the effects of glycation. Because of this, when blood sugar remains elevated over long periods, both systems can be affected in parallel. Changes in kidney function and changes in retinal function often develop along the same timeline. But the connection goes even further. When kidney function begins to decline, it affects how the body manages fluid. Fluid retention may increase, blood pressure may rise, and this can influence the pressure inside the eye. This internal pressure plays a critical role in eye health. When it becomes elevated over time, it can place stress on the optic nerve. The optic nerve is responsible for transmitting visual information from the eye to the brain, and when it is under pressure, its function gradually declines. What makes this particularly important is how subtle it can be. There is no pain. The changes begin slowly, often affecting peripheral vision first, so gradually that many people don't notice until significant changes have already occurred. What's rarely explained is that all of these processes are connected. They are not separate issues. They form a chain. It begins with blood sugar patterns, then affects small blood vessels, then influences other systems like the kidneys, and eventually impacts structures involved in vision. It is one continuous pathway, and it moves in one direction, from metabolic imbalance to changes in vision over time. Now, let me share an example that might sound familiar. A woman in her late 60s, active, independent, taking care of herself, no major diagnoses. She noticed her vision wasn't as clear as it used to be. Nothing dramatic, just gradual changes. She updated her glasses more than once over a few years, each time hoping that would solve it. But something interesting stood out when she started paying closer attention. Her vision was usually clearer in the morning, before eating. Later in the day, especially after larger meals, things seemed less sharp. Lights at night looked a bit more scattered. And on days when she ate lighter, simpler meals, her vision felt noticeably better. At first, she didn't connect these things, because no one had explained that connection to her. But once she began observing patterns, it became easier to see what might be influencing those changes. And that's really the key point here. Your body often gives you signals, small ones, subtle ones, but consistent. And when you start paying attention to those patterns, you begin to understand what adjustments may actually help. Now let's talk about something that is much more practical. Because once you understand what may be happening, the next question is always the same. What can I actually do about it? There are a few key areas that tend to make the biggest difference, and they are simpler than most people expect. The first one is how your body handles glucose throughout the day. Not eliminating foods, not strict diets, but timing and order. The way you begin your day matters more than most people realize. After a full night of rest, your body is in a relatively stable state, and the first meal sets the tone for everything that follows. If that first meal causes a sharp rise in blood sugar, it often leads to more fluctuations later. But when the first meal is balanced, something different happens. Energy stays more even, and the body handles the rest of the day more smoothly. A simple approach I often suggest is starting the day with foods that include protein and healthy fats. For example, eggs, or yogurt, or something similar. This helps slow down how quickly glucose enters the bloodstream, and that alone can reduce the kind of shifts that affect the lens of the eye. Now, sometime later in the day, adding foods that support eye health becomes important, particularly cooked vegetables. Dark leafy greens are especially helpful here. When they're cooked, your body can absorb their nutrients more effectively. And when they're eaten with a small amount of fat, those nutrients are even easier to use. These are small details, but over time they matter. During the day, there's one habit that stands out as especially useful. And it's not about what you eat, it's about how you eat, the order of foods. If you begin your meal with fiber-rich foods, vegetables for example, and then include protein, and leave starches or sweeter foods toward the end, the body processes that meal differently. The rise in blood sugar tends to be slower and more controlled. The same foods, different sequence, different result. And this has been observed consistently. Another simple habit that makes a noticeable difference is movement after meals. Not exercise in the traditional sense, just gentle movement, a short walk, even 10 minutes. When your muscles are active, they naturally take in glucose from the bloodstream. This helps reduce how high levels rise after eating. And it does it without requiring anything complicated, just consistency. In the evening, the focus shifts slightly. This is where the body restores and rebalances. Certain foods can support that process. For example, foods that naturally contain minerals like magnesium and zinc. These nutrients are involved in many processes throughout the body, including those that support normal cellular function. You don't need anything exotic. Simple whole foods are enough. Seeds, for example, can be a practical option, and adding them regularly can help maintain a better balance over time. There are also foods that provide nutrients important for how the body processes energy, including certain B vitamins. Again, these come from everyday foods, nothing complicated. What matters is consistency, not perfection. Another small but meaningful adjustment relates to timing in the evening. Finishing your last meal a few hours before going to sleep gives your body time to settle. When digestion is still very active late into the night, it can influence how your body manages energy during a time that is meant for recovery. And your eyes, like the rest of your body, benefit from that recovery window. Giving that process space can make a difference over time. Now, here are 2 simple ways to start observing your own patterns. First, notice timing. Pay attention to when your vision feels more clear, and when it feels less clear, especially in relation to meals. If you begin to see a pattern, that information is valuable. Second, try something very simple for a few days. Keep a light record of what you eat and how your vision feels afterward. Nothing detailed, just general impressions. Clear or less clear? Better or not as good as earlier? Many people are surprised at what they notice within just a week, because once you begin observing, patterns tend to reveal themselves, and those patterns tell you what your body responds to. Now let's bring everything together in a simple, practical way, because understanding is useful, but action is what creates change. If you were to focus on just a few things starting today, I would suggest keeping it very simple. At your next meal, try this. Begin with vegetables, then include your main protein, and leave bread, rice, or anything sweet until the end. You don't need to remove anything, just change the order. Then, after that meal, take a short walk. Not tomorrow, today. Even 5 to 10 minutes is enough to start noticing a difference over time. Next, think about one small addition to your routine, something consistent. A handful of seeds in the afternoon. A balanced breakfast in the morning. Not everything at once, just 1 or 2 things done regularly. And then give your body time to respond, because that's the part many people overlook. These changes don't work instantly, but they do work gradually, and in many cases, they influence the underlying patterns that have been building for years. In the evening, set a simple boundary. Finish your last meal a few hours before sleep. Give your body a window to settle, to restore, to reset. These are not complicated steps, but they are meaningful ones. And over time, they can shift the internal environment your body operates in. Now here's something important to remember. Your eyes are not isolated. They don't work separately from the rest of your body. They reflect it. They respond to it. They show you what's happening beneath the surface. So when clarity changes, it's often not just about vision itself. It's information. And when you begin to understand that information, you start to see what matters. Not just stronger lenses, but better support, better balance, better daily habits. You don't need to do everything perfectly. You just need to begin noticing, and then adjust, step by step. Before we finish, I'd like to ask you something simple. How old are you? You don't need to share anything else, just your age, because it helps shape what kind of content will be most useful going forward. And if you found this helpful, stay with this channel. Everything here is built around one idea: understanding the signals your body gives you, and learning how to respond to them in a calm, practical, realistic way. Take care of your habits, and your body will take care of the rest. Your eyes are not the problem, they are the signal. And now, you know how to read it. Thanks to be here.